right on the morning of January 6th. My 4 children arrived at my house with a decision already made: to put me in a nursing home and sell the lot where I've lived my whole life. I am Connie. I'm 68 years old, a seamstress from Boyle Heights in Los Angeles. And I've spent 3 years raising my 2 grandkids alone. The children of my youngest daughter slipped away from a stroke without giving me time to even hug her one last time. My other children believed that a woman with a thimble and scissors doesn't understand numbers or property deeds. They never bothered to know the woman who gave birth to them. That morning, January 6th, the sun came through the dining room windows, just like it always does in Los Angeles in January. Dry and white, completely stripped of the summer humidity. I had set the table early. I had made hot apple cider and fresh cinnamon rolls, the exact same ones my kids claimed to love whenever it was convenient to remember I existed. Grandkids, 9-year-old Emmett and Valerie, had already found their holiday toys at the foot of the bed and were running down the hallway with pure, clean joy that only belongs to children who don't yet know what the world costs. I heard the cars before I saw them. These weren't the rattling engines of our neighborhood. They were new, expensive engines. The kind of engines that don't apologize. Peeked through the living room window and watched them park. A gray SUV, a black sedan, red car I instantly recognized as my daughter-in-law's. All 4 of them stepped out. My oldest son, Jerry, wearing a crisp plaid shirt and carrying an executive's gut. My daughter Patty, her hair dyed blonde, wearing dark sunglasses even though there wasn't enough glare to justify them. My son Rob, who always arrived talking on his cell phone, Cephalone, and never quite seemed to arrive at all. And my daughter Monica, the youngest of the 4, who at least had the decency not to smile when she walked through the door. Jerry kissed the air next to my cheek. Patty walked straight into the dining room without so much as looking at the kids. Rob was still glued to his phone. Monica stared at me for a second too long before looking away. I sat down in my usual chair, the one right by the window where the good light comes in for my sewing. They settled around the table. Nobody touched the cider. Jerry placed a clear plastic folder on my embroidered tablecloth, the exact kind of folder lawyers use when they want something to look official. Mom, let's cut to the chase. Because we have commitments this afternoon, Jerry said, resting his hands flat on the plastic. We've been talking a lot among ourselves, and we came to a conclusion. This house needs maintenance that you just can't afford anymore. Boyle Heights isn't what it used to be. A developer made us a very serious offer for the lot. With that money, we can pay for a top-tier assisted living facility for you. It has nurses, a garden, activities for your age group. We already went to see it. It's in Pasadena. It's really beautiful. The silence followed was the kind that takes up every square inch of a room. And my grandkids, I said, without moving a single muscles in my face. Patty shifted in her chair, settling into the posture of someone who had rehearsed her lines. Emmett and Valerie are too much for you, Mom. You're 68. They run, they make noise. They need things you just can't give them anymore. Rob's mother-in-law has a spare room at her place and said she can take the girl for a while until we find something more permanent. For Emmett, we already looked into a boarding school scholarship through a state program that has a very solid reputation, separating the children of my dead daughter, sending them off to strangers, giving them away like old clothes that don't fit in the closet anymore. My hands were resting on my knees, hidden beneath the table where no one could see them. I slowly closed them into fists. Rob finally put his phone in his jacket pocket. Look, Mom, we aren't taking anything away from you. We're giving you a solution. You already did your part. You raised 4 kids. You worked your whole life. Just rest now. This lot is worth a lot of money now that they put the new transit line nearby. It would be a total waste to just leave it like this. An old house and a sewing shop that barely pays for groceries. I didn't raise my voice. I don't have the habit of raising it. I stood up from my chair, walked over to the stove, turned off the burner, under the cider, and stood there for a moment with my back to them. I stared at the green tile, right above the stove. The same tile my husband and I put up the very first December we lived in this house, using a mortar mix he made by hand because we couldn't afford to pay a mason. If you've already decided, then fine. I am not going to fight on the 6th of January. Jerry let out a breath he had been holding. I knew you'd understand, Mom. Really is what's best for everyone. The kids are leaving with me tonight, I said, turning around to face them. Tomorrow, if the law says you're right, then whoever needs to come can come. But tonight, they sleep with me. Monica was the only one who didn't say a word. She watched me from her chair with a look that wasn't pride and it wasn't relief. It was something else, maybe shame, maybe the delayed dawn of a conscience. I went to my room. I didn't pack any nice clothes. I opened the bottom drawer of the wardrobe, one that is always locked, and pulled out a brown canvas bag. It was the bag my husband used to carry his tools when we were young and didn't have the money for a real toolbox. I packed documents. I packed the kids' medical cards. I packed 3 changes of clothes for each of them. Right before closing the drawer, I grabbed the one thing I always grab when I need to remember exactly who I am. It was a silver thimble, small, dented on one side, with an almost faded engraving of tiny flowers around the rim. It had belonged to my mother, and before that, to her mother, and before that, to someone whose name nobody remembers anymore, but whose hands are still somehow alive in that worn piece of metal. I dropped it into the front pocket of my blouse, right over my chest. I walked out into the hallway. Emmett and Valerie looked up at me with that built-in radar kids have for detecting when something is wrong in the air. Where are we going with the bag, Grandma? Emmett asked, adjusting a toy car he had just found that morning tangled in his blankets. To Mrs. Martha's house, my love. We're going to spend the rest of the day over there. Why aren't our aunts and uncles staying? Because they have commitments, I said, without entirely lying to them. I walked past the dining room. My 4 children were already dividing up the cinnamon rolls without having waited for permission. Rob had opened the folder and was whispering over some paperwork with Jerry. Patty was staring at my sewing shop from the doorway with that appraising look people get when they don't know how to hide their greed. Happy holidays, I told them from the front door. Not one of them looked up. We closed the street door behind us. Afternoon air in Boyle Heights smelled like distant fireworks and tortillas warming on a neighbor's griddle. Emmett grabbed my right hand. Valerie grabbed my left. We walked the 4 blocks to Martha's house with the calm, steady pace of people who don't owe a dime to anybody. Children thought I walked out of there defeated. They thought an older woman's silence was a white flag. They have lived so long without knowing me that they learned to invent a version of me that felt convenient to them. A sentimental, confused little old lady. clinging to a house full of junk and fabric scraps, completely incapable of understanding the business of the modern world. Didn't know that I was the one who built a good piece of their modern world. Martha opened the door without asking a single question. She's been my neighbor for 32 years, and she learned a long time ago that when I show up with the canvas bag, means something serious went down and questions can wait. She made hot cocoa for the kids, set them up in front of the TV with a warm blanket, poured me a large mug of black coffee. I sat down at her kitchen table. I unzipped the canvas bag, pulled out the documents, spread them flat over her yellow floral plastic tablecloth, and reviewed them one by one. I checked them with the exact same focus I use when reviewing a sewing pattern before cutting the fabric. 'Cause a mistake at the beginning costs a whole lot more at the end. Right here's everything my children never wanted to understand about me. When my husband Ernie died 11 years ago, he left behind something he had built with a lot of silence and a lot of patience over the previous 2 decades. Ernie was a welder. He started out patching up iron gates in the neighborhood patios, and over time he worked his way up. Bigger gates, heavy security doors, structural steel for industrial warehouses, contracts with major developers. He never showed off. He never bought a flashy truck. He never stopped eating Sunday dinners with us. He slowly and quietly started buying up commercial real estate in different neighborhoods across Los Angeles. And he always did it through a limited liability company that he registered in my name, long before I fully understood what that meant. Right before he died, he called me into the room on a Tuesday afternoon. We both knew time was running out, and he laid it all out for me. He told me where every single document was. He introduced me over the phone to Attorney Sterling, who had been handling his affairs for years. And then he told me something I never forgot. "You were always the smart one between the 2 of us, Connie. I just laid the bricks. You're the one who knows where every single one of them goes." My kids never showed the slightest interest in their father's business while he was alive, and they cared even less about mine after he was gone. They just got used to receiving a monthly bank transfer that Attorney Sterling set up on my strict instructions, funded by the smaller rental properties under the LLC. They never asked where that money came from. They never investigated the name of the company that appeared on their bank's statements. They just assumed it was some old pension, some hidden savings, the kind of thing old women hoard without anyone really understanding how. Kark. What CISO Someses was that the commercial spaces where they ran their own businesses didn't actually belong to them. Jerry owned a massive hardware store in West Hollywood. Patty managed a high-end salon in Beverly Hills. Rob and his partner ran an insurance agency downtown. Monica, the only one who had actually studied something useful, operated a commercial print shop in Burbank. All 4 of them paid rent that they considered a massive favor from some old friend of their dad's, all managed by Attorney Sterling, acting as the proxy for an LLC they never bothered to look up. That LLC was mine. I was their landlord. For 11 years, I had been charging them a purely symbolic rent. They celebrated it as good luck and great networking, completely oblivious to the fact that the hand signing their lease agreements was the exact same hand that used to wash their dirty laundry. I neatly stacked the documents back into the bag. I took the silver thimble, placed it in the palm of my hand, and stared at it for a moment. My mother's taught me how to sew with this thimble when I was. She told you this thimble isn't meant for decoration, meant to protect the finger that pushes the needle. It's there so you can push harder without bleeding, so you can make it to the very end of the seam. I dropped the thimble back into my pocket. The next day, January 7th, I walked out of Martha's house at 8 in the morning with the bag over my shoulder and my paperwork perfectly organized. I left the kids at the breakfast table with her. I kissed them both on the forehead and promised I'd be back by noon. I took an Uber straight to Attorney Sterling's office on Wilshire Boulevard. It was one of those 1950s buildings with heavy dark wood doors that always smell like old varnish and crisp paper. The secretary recognized me instantly and waved me right through. Attorney Sterling is 72 years old, and he carries the kind of absolute calm that only belongs to those who have seen way too much to ever be shocked by anything new. When he saw me walk in with the canvas bag, he poured me a cup of coffee before I even opened my mouth. He told me exactly what I already suspected. Jerry had called him 2 days before Epiphany. He asked if there was any legal avenue to file for guardianship over me, arguing that I was no longer mentally fit to manage my own assets. Sterling told him that would require medical evaluations, a formal lawsuit. The process was incredibly long and expensive. Jerry asked if there was a shortcut. Sterling told him absolutely not and hung up the phone. I wasn't surprised. But it still hurt. The thing is, I had already processed that pain the night before at Martha's kitchen table, drinking black coffee in total silence while my grandkids slept in the next room. Mr. Sterling, I want to terminate the commercial leases for all 4 of them, I said, sliding the stack of documents across his mahogany desk. Jerry, Patty, Rob, Monica. They have 30 days to vacate the premises. Sterling didn't even raise an eyebrow. He just nodded slowly, like a man confirming a weather forecast he had predicted days ago. The contracts contain a unilateral termination clause in favor of the landlord. You are entirely within your rights to exercise it without providing any further explanation. I will draft the eviction notices today. I also want to transfer the deed of the Boyle Heights house into an ironclad trust for Emmett and Valerie. I want it locked tight until they turn 25. Consider it done. Anything else? Yes. Freeze all monthly bank transfers to my children's accounts, effective immediately. Sterling picked up his pen. We worked straight through for 2.5 hours. By the time I walked back out onto the street, morning had been thoroughly warmed by the January sun, and the stalls at the Grand Central Market smelled like fresh flowers and cut oranges. My kids received their notarized eviction notices that exact same afternoon. I know the precise moment it happened because Jerry called me at 5:16 p.m., which is the exact timestamp glowing on my phone screen under my missed calls list. Then Rob called. Then Patty. Then a number I didn't recognize, which was probably the lawyer Jerry had threatened to hire at some point, but never actually paid because his accounts were already frozen. Monica didn't call that afternoon. 2 days later, on January 9th, a taxi dropped us off in front of the house in Boyle Heights at 10 in the morning. Martha came with us to watch the kids in the front yard while I went inside. The street was dead quiet. Parked right up against the curb were my kids' 4 cars, including the red one belonging to Rob's wife. I pushed the front door open. They were all standing in the living room, buzzing with that nervous, electric energy of people who have rehearsed a speech, but still aren't sure it's going to work. Jerry had his notice in his hand. One corner was completely crumpled from how hard he had been squeezing it. Patty had red eyes, even though she wasn't actively crying. Rob was staring hard at the floorboards. Monica sat on the armchair in the corner, separated from the other three by a small but incredibly visible distance. There was also a man in a cheap suit I had never seen before. He was standing near my display cabinet, clutching a black briefcase, radiating the deep discomfort of a man who just realized he walked into a room where he was absolutely not welcome. "Mom, thank God you're here," Jerry started, using that smooth, practiced tone he reserves for when he wants something completely insane to sound reasonable. "This is Attorney Vance. He came to help us find a solution that works for everyone. That notice Sterling sent us has to be a clerical error. Can't just terminate your own children's leases. It's not legal. It's not fair." I walked right past him to the head of the dining room table, sat down. I placed the canvas bag flat on the wood. "Why don't you all sit down?" I said. Jerry tried to stand his ground. Patty pulled out a chair and collapsed into it. Then Rob, then Jerry, finally defeated by the sheer weight of his own legs. Attorney Vance looked around for a place to sit, but ultimately just stood awkwardly against the wall, pulled the silver thimble from my blouse pocket and set it right in the dead center of the table. They stared at it for a second, totally lost. "Thimble belonged to my mom," I said, "and before that, it was her mom's. The one who knows how to sew is the one who uses it. It protects the finger that pushes the needle. It doesn't decorate. It doesn't show off. It just works." Patty opened her mouth to say something. I shut it with a single look before the first syllable even left her throat. I reached into the bag and pulled out 5 envelopes. 4 had names on them. The 5th was blank. I took the 4 with names and slid them across the table, one to each of my children. Attorney Vance took a step forward. I looked dead at him. "Yours isn't here," I told him. "Because you are not a part of this family. You are not a part of this business." The man froze in his tracks. "Read them," I told my kids. Jerry was the first to tear his open. I watched his eyes scan the first few lines. I watched the arrogant certainty he had carried into my house physically drain out of his body. His breathing hitched. He flattened the paper against the table with both hands, like he desperately needed to feel something solid underneath him. "It's the hardware store," he stammered. "It says the building where your hardware store operates belongs to CE Real Estate, LLC, I said. "Exact same company that has been signing your commercial lease for the last 11 years through Mr. Sterling. Same company that charged you $3,000 a month for a space that the market priced at $15,000. The C stands for Connie. E stands for Ernie. Your father and I built that company by stacking penny on top of penny for 20 straight years. He welded iron gates. I sewed quinceañera dresses. I patched up torn school uniforms. And while we did that, you all grew up and convinced yourselves that the success you enjoyed was something you manufactured entirely on your own." Rob dropped the paper like it was on fire. "That's impossible," he said, looking frantically at Jerry. "Jerry, this can't be real." Sterling was always the lawyer for Dad's friend. He was never. "Mr. Sterling has always been my legal proxy," I said. "Friend of your dad's was your dad. And that friend's business was our business. You never once asked. You never once investigated. You just took the monthly wire transfer, paid your heavily subsidized rent, and assumed the entire universe was naturally organized to favor you. Patty stood up. Her hands were shaking violently, which was strange to see, because Patty never lets anyone see her sweat. Mom, if you had all of this, why did you live like this? Why did you sit in that sewing shop like you had nothing? Why did you let us think you were— I was what, Patty? The silence between us stretched out for several agonizing seconds. That I was poor? That I was old and useless? I couldn't comprehend the modern world? I did it because I like my job. Because sewing is what I know how to do, it's what connects me to my mother and to yours. Because the simplicity of a life well lived isn't poverty, Patty. It's a choice. 'Cause while I sat at my machine and sewed in total silence, nobody bothered me. Nobody demanded accounting reports from me. Empire your father and I built kept growing without a single one of you being able to sink your hands into it. Rob stood up and paced over to the window. I could hear his long, strained breathing. So, this whole time you were just spying on us. No, I was protecting you. There is a massive difference. Protecting us? How? Rob asked without turning around. Cheap rent you were paying was a safety net, not a debt, not a favor. A family safety net. As long as your overhead was dirt cheap, you could grow your businesses without drowning in fixed costs. I made that decision entirely on my own after your father died, 'cause I wanted your businesses to thrive, even if you never thanked me for it. That safety net existed under one strict condition that none of you knew about. The condition was that this family remained a family. Exact day you decided I was a burden that needed to be locked away in a nursing home, and that your dead sister's children were an inconvenience to be scattered among strangers. That was the day the condition was broken. Jerry slammed his knuckles against the table. Not hard. Just the dull, muted desperation of a man who has run out of arguments but desperately needs his body to do something. And what exactly are we supposed to do now? The hardware store has inventory. It has payroll. It has vendor contracts. If you kick me out in 30 days, I'm bankrupt. That sounds like a problem the modern business world you know so well can help you solve, I said. Mom, please? Patty jumped in, dropping her voice to that soft velvet register she uses when she wants to play the voice of reason. Let's think about this together. It doesn't have to be this drastic. We can reach an agreement. You stay in the house. We don't sell anything. We just stop fighting. I extended my hand over the table, palm facing up. The keys to this house. What? The keys you have to my house. All of them. Right now. The living room plunged into a physical silence. The kind of heavy pressure that drops right before a thunderstorm. Rob was the first to reach into his pocket. He placed his keychain on the wood without making eye contact. Then Jerry, moving with a robotic, feated twitch. Patty took the longest. She dug through her leather designer bag, pulled out her keys, dropped them with a metallic clatter that echoed way louder than it should have. Monica hadn't moved from the armchair the entire time. She had spent the last 20 minutes staring blankly at her own hands. When the other three had finally surrendered their keys, she stood up slowly. She walked over to the table, set her keychain gently next to the others, and right before she pulled away, she looked me in the eye and spoke in a whisper so quiet. I think I was the only one who caught it. I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't answer her right then. I heard her. Attorney Vance grabbed his briefcase and walked out the front door without saying a single word. He was smart enough to realize there was absolutely zero profit in staying. My 4 children followed right behind him. Their footsteps, echoing down the hallway, sounded totally different than they had 2 days prior when they marched in carrying folders and ultimatums. Now they sounded exactly like what they were. The footsteps of 4 people who had just realized the ground beneath their feet wasn't nearly as solid as they thought. I listened to the cars start up, the red one first, then the other 2 together. And finally, Jerry's SUV pulled away alone, lingering a bit longer, as if it physically hurt him to leave the curb. I stayed sitting at the head of the table. The silver thimble was still resting dead center on the dark wood. I pinched it between 2 fingers, held it up against the light pouring through the window, and for just a second, I traced the faded floral engraving along the rim. Martha walked in with the kids. Emmett and Valerie sprinted into the dining room and glued themselves to my legs. "Did my aunts and uncles leave?" Valerie asked. "They left, my love. Are they coming back?" "I don't know yet, but we are staying." Months that followed were the most peaceful I can remember in a very long time. I hired a couple of guys from the neighborhood to deep clean the shop, paint the patio walls a shade of green I had always loved, finally fix the leak in the back room that had been waiting out 2 rainy seasons. Emmett and Valerie moved into the big bedroom with brand new bunk beds they picked out themselves at a furniture store downtown. I enrolled them in a great school a 10-minute walk away, and I hired math tutors for both of them, 'cause they had fallen a bit behind during the chaos that followed their mother's death. Sewing shop stayed open, not because I needed the money to keep the lights on, but because I needed it to stay grounded. Is something profoundly organizing about the rhythm of a sewing machine. It's as if the steady, mechanical thud of the needle, pulling up and down, tells the rest of your body that everything is on track, that there is a thread, a direction, and a final destination. I actually expanded the shop. I bought 3 more machines. I started teaching classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays for women in the neighborhood who wanted to learn a trade or sharpen the skills they already had. Didn't charge tuition. I only charged them the raw cost of materials, nothing more. One Tuesday in March, a young woman walked in. She couldn't have been older than 25, balancing a toddler on her hip. Her name was Isabel. She had spent the last 2 years living with a man who made it a point to tell her every single day that she was far too stupid to learn anything new. She found the shop because she saw my flyer taped to the window of the corner pharmacy. She sat down in the very back row, as far from the other women as possible, hunched over with the posture of someone who has spent a long time trying to take up the least amount of space in a room. I handed her a needle and a square of cotton fabric, and I asked her to thread it. Her hands shook violently. Thread missed on the first try. It missed on the second. She forced it through on the third, but she pulled the tension way too tight, and the knot tangled into a mess. "I ruined it," she whispered, refusing to look up. "I always ruin everything." I reached into the pocket of my apron, pulled out the silver thimble, and pressed it firmly into her palm. She stared at it, confused. "My mom taught me how to sew with this," I told her. "She told me the thimble is there to help you push the needle without tearing up your finger. It's so you can reach the very end of the stitch, even if it hurts a little along the way." A twisted knot isn't a failure, Isabel. It's just the first attempt. Second one always comes out better. She slowly closed her fingers around the metal. Over in the corner, sitting on a blanket Martha had laid out, her little girl let out a happy, quiet babble that made the rest of the women in the shop smile. Right then, I knew exactly what was left to do with everything. Ernie and I had built in the shadows. You don't hoard it. You don't show it off. You use it to help other hands learn how to push their own needles. I saw Monica again in April. She didn't come to beg for anything. She knocked on the front door on a Saturday morning while Emmett and Valerie were in the patio kicking a ball around. She brought fresh tamales from the lady on First Street. The ones who makes the best in the neighborhood, wrapped tightly in newspaper and still piping hot. I didn't open the door right away. I let her stand on the sidewalk for a minute. Then I turned the knob. We sat at the kitchen table. Kids greeted her with that incredible, effortless grace children have for forgiving things they don't even fully understand. Valerie showed her a drawing she made at school. Emmett asked if she knew how to play Chutes and Ladders. Monica never asked me for her print shop back. She didn't update me on the other three or complain about whatever they were doing to survive the fallout. She just told me she was sorry. She said that the day they showed up for Epiphany, she knew in her gut it was wrong. She just didn't have the spine to say it out loud. She said carrying the silence of that day had been a lot heavier than she ever expected. I poured her a cup of coffee. I handed her a plate for the tamales. I didn't tell her everything was forgiven, because it wasn't forgiven. Lying to her would have been a massive lack of respect to both of us. But I did tell her that the doors to this kitchen weren't locked forever if she decided to start walking a different path. She left right before noon. She left the food. She didn't make any grand promises. Neither did I. That night, when the house was dead quiet and the kids were fast asleep, I sat alone in the shop with the lamp shining down on my sewing machine. I didn't sew. I just sat there, rolling the silver thimble around in my hand, feeling the cold metal first, and then feeling it warm up against my skin. I thought about my mother teaching me how to thread a needle. I thought about Ernie buying that very first commercial lot with the money he saved up over 3 grueling years, hiding the balance from me so I wouldn't get my hopes up before it was a sure thing. I thought about my daughter who is no longer here. Children were sleeping 3 rooms away, with the deep, heavy peace of kids who know they are safe. I thought about my other 4 children. Each one of them now carrying the crushing weight of their own decisions, learning the hard way what it feels like when the ground you walk on was never actually yours, but only borrowed. I didn't feel satisfaction, the kind that hurts. Anyway, I felt something much closer to the quiet calm that settles in right after a long, violent storm breaks, when the air just smells like wet dirt and new beginnings. I placed the thimbles on top of the sewing machine. It sat there, small, dented, shining, right next to a spool of blue thread I was going to use the next morning to finish a dress for a woman who needed it for her son's wedding. I turned off the light. There are things you build in total silence over decades, things nobody ever sees until the exact moment they become absolutely necessary. There are women who carry the thread of an entire family without a single person ever stopping to ask how they do it or what it costs them. Are thimbles that don't decorate, that don't show off. They just protect the finger that pushes absolutely sure the shoes hold together until the very end. I am Connie. I am 68 years old, and I am a seamstress in Boyle Heights. And sometimes an older woman's silence isn't resignation. It is a seam has been working on from the inside for years. Connie didn't scream. She didn't beg. She didn't break. She just kept pushing the needle with the thimble her mother gave her. Because true dignity is never proven with words. It's proven with roots. And the strongest roots are the ones nobody sees. The ones growing in total silence, right underneath everything else. A quick, kind disclaimer. This story was created and narrated by artificial intelligence, designed to entertain you and hopefully leave you with something valuable in your heart at the end of the day. This narrative is a work of fiction, fully generated and voiced through artificial intelligence. Its sole purpose is listener entertainment and to provide a thoughtful reflection. All characters portrayed in this story, including Connie, her children, her grandchildren, Attorney Sterling, and business entities like CE Real Estate LLC, are completely fictional and algorithmic creations. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, real families, businesses, or historical events is purely coincidental. While the story references real geographic locations like Boyle Heights, Los Angeles, Pasadena, or Beverly Hills, these are used strictly for atmospheric context and do not represent objective facts about these areas. Furthermore, the legal, real estate, and financial maneuvers described, such as commercial lease terminations, trust formations, guardianship disputes, have been dramatized for narrative effect. Under no circumstances should this story be taken as professional legal, financial, or psychological advice. If you are facing similar familial, legal, or estate issues, we strongly advise consulting with a certified attorney or professional. Creators and distributors of this content expressly disclaim any liability arising from the interpretation or application of this fictional work.